And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Tonight it is One Guy and a Bible. Daniel contacted me yesterday. We normally like to pre-record our programs on Monday afternoons, and he contacted me and he said he had to run to the daycare to pick up his son Caden, who had a fever. And so a few moments ago, he wasn't online. I thought, well, I hope that doesn't mean anything bad. And he finally got on, and lo and behold, he and his son both have the flu. And so he's sitting this round out. He might be somewhere in the background, sort of kind of maybe monitoring a little bit to make sure I don't need any kind of technology assistance and what have you. But other than that, he's sick and he just needs to kick back. He needs to enjoy. Actually, I have to tell you, I think what the problem is, I'm very, very confident that what Daniel has is what is known as swine fever. Last week, my Razorbacks played Auburn, the number one team in America, and they whipped them. Now, last week, Daniel was wearing an Auburn t-shirt in anticipation of a great victory. So guess where he is tonight? Oh, and I not only have my little banner there. Can you see that? Now, a lot of you ladies who might have collected these, what do they call them? Beanie bags, something like that. I don't even know what they're called. This is TY. Yeah, Beanie Baby. And this was given to me. Okay, this was born May 15th, 1995. I'm hoping that one of these days it'll be worth $1 gazillion. It was given to me as a gift, and I wouldn't part with it for anything. Scattered around my office here is a good bit of Razorback memorabilia and sports stuff, because I was raised in and around Fayetteville, Arkansas. I attended Fayetteville High for 1 year, and so I'm a Razorback through and through. I bleed Razorback red. And it was a fantastic time last week when my Razorbacks actually pulled off the upset of Auburn, the number one team. Now, then they traveled to Alabama, and they came within 2 points of beating Alabama. And Alabama is an awesome team. I mean, they are an awesome team on their home court. And so Arkansas just, they almost beat them. Arkansas is an amazing team under the current coach. So just had to rub that in a little bit, just to let you know, I'm not convinced that Daniel actually has the flu. I think he's got swine flu. Woo, pig, suey. Sorry about that, Daniel. I know you're liable to be even sicker now. So, get well quickly, get well soon. Okay, back to more serious matters, more important matters. Want to thank you for joining me this evening on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And I tell you, it has been an incredible bit of time. I don't always save what I call testimonials. And I have been encouraged to save them as, not a way of patting myself on the back by any stretch of the imagination. I don't believe in doing that. But nonetheless, I have been encouraged by a large number of people to save some testimonials from individuals that have been impacted by covenant eschatology through the ministry of Preterist Research Institute. And of course, the ministry of William Bell, as he and I worked together for so long. And so I thought I would share with you just a couple of things of testimonials that I have received just over the last couple of weeks. Okay, this is not by any means, not by any means, all of the testimonials. It would keep me busy, to be honest about it. Copying and pasting, were I to do that. But again, I don't do that. I don't want to seem vainglorious. And, while I absolutely 100% or 1,000% do appreciate testimonials, I am just thrilled at the power of God's word. I am thrilled at the liberating message of covenant eschatology, that it truly is gospel. And by that, I mean good news. So with all of that said, and I'm not going to give you the names of any of these people who have written these testimonials. I'm just simply going to read what they have to say. One individual contacted me about a week and a half ago and said, "Brother Don, it never ceases to amaze me what blessing you are with your knowledge and wisdom. I have been away dabbling in rabbit holes just to see where others are at, but I always return to the truth, and you, sir, are at the top of my list as the most knowledgeable. Very simple to understand, and you back up all you say with scripture. I have most of your books, but I see I need to get some of your more recent ones. When I was teaching Sunday school, I began to teach a lot of your work. I would not push anyone to just accept it, but to study, to show yourself approved. Most would not even read the verses I left for the week's assignment. At the beginning of class, I would ask if anyone knew where and what happened and left off. I would be given the details. They were good at it. Then I would ask if anyone read the homework assignment. Dead silence. All I could hear was dead silence and then a nervous giggle. I was teaching Revelation, 5 points of view without pushing any of you. Soon I was relieved of my class and I got booted out. Most so-called believers in truth do have itching ears. They're manipulated by fear. Most want to be raptured. They have a belief, spelled B-E-L-I-E. The F was not introduced until 1750. I rather know than believe. You, my brother, are knowledgeable and a great teacher. Sadly, others do it for profit. Believers will pay because they have the fear of dying and religiosity reaching cashes in. Oh, how they try and twist scripture, just feel good and safe. May the Lord strengthen you and your wife, sir. I love you and your ministry. I will participate what I can to help. I will be ordering a couple of books also that I must have in my library among your others I have of yours. Another person posted and said, quote, I am so happy that I found your videos several years ago. Although I love eschatology, I found myself getting frustrated until I found your videos. I learned about types and shadows of the real thing, as well as pre and post trib. Someone even went so far as saying to me, you just don't understand. Mr. Preston, I never knew that I was a preterist until I met you through these studies. For the first time, I felt like I knew our Savior, Jesus Christ, even better because I had the right perspective. I absolutely love the morning musings. It's so comforting to know there is another person that is in love with the Lord and has that fire inside to teach. This world needs more teachers such as yourself. God bless you. And just know that I have a couple of your books that I'm looking forward to reading on my Kindle. And like I said, I mean, that's just two out of a host of testimonials that I could share with you. But I'm very, very often asked, what is there any growth in the movement of preterism? And all I have to do is to read a couple of these quotes. And I don't know if those quotes came up with the names of the posters on the screen. I suspected that it did as I look at it, but I ask that those of you who read that will not take those names and do anything with them. So anyway, I am often asked if covenant eschatology of the preterist movement is growing. And as I mentioned a moment ago, these quotes are, I mean, they are, a minuscule sampling of the kind of comments that I get literally every single day. And I will tell you this, over the last couple of months, over 90%, now think about this, over 90% of the book orders that we have received have been from brand new people that we have literally never heard of before. It is like they have been sitting in the background, they have been auditing, they have been watching, they've been listening, and now they feel it's time to look deeper, to search deeper, and to know more. And that is so exciting. When over 90% of the book sales are from brand spanking new people, then that tells you that it's not just, the same tiny little handful of people as our opponents like to claim. Yeah, right. Anyway, it's not the same group of people ordering over and over and over. Now that happens, I'll guarantee you what. But nonetheless, to reiterate, it's not just a single group of the same people ordering books all the time. No. The outreach is growing and growing and growing. And that, I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is just wonderfully exciting. And as I thought about tonight's program, I thought, well, we have talked about John 7 and 8 for a good little bit. So I'm going to try to recapitulate, encapsulate, and summarize what we have seen over the last few weeks as Daniel and I have spoken to you about the temple and about Jesus's incredibly significant actions in the temple of Jerusalem in John 7 and John chapter 8. Now, we can justifiably say that as we go deeper and deeper into John chapter 8, that we are looking at a context that is still, if not in the temple, and John chapter 8, 1 and following is probably when Jesus has just left the temple. But nonetheless, the proximity to the temple is there. The scene of the celebration of Sukkot is still fresh on the hearts and on the minds of everyone. And the things that Jesus said, not only while he was in the temple in John 7:35 and following, but also the things that he said in John 8:12 on the day after the Feast of Tabernacle. Now, once again, let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that what Jesus said in John 6 through 8, not just 7 and 8, but in John 6 through 8, Jesus recalls the wilderness exodus. And he talks about how Moses, yet not Moses, but the Father, have given them manna. And he reminded them that if they would believe in him, that they would have the true manna that comes from God out of heaven. And once again, he's speaking of himself. Then in John chapter 7, Jesus said, if any man believes on me, let him come to me, and out of his belly shall flow rivers of living waters. Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is reflective of two things. Number one, it's reflective of the original Exodus. If you'll remember in Exodus chapter 17, verse 6 and following, the children of Israel were in the Exodus. They didn't have water. They were extremely thirsty. And the Lord told Moses to walk up to a rock and there to speak to the rock, or more literally, more actually and truthfully, to strike the rock. Moses approached the rock. And have you ever wondered what was going through Moses' mind? I mean, they're out there in the middle of nowhere. And if you can imagine being out there in a desert, there are no rivers, there are no streams that are obvious anywhere. That's why the people are thirsty. And so Yahweh tells Moses, walk up to that rock right over there, strike the rock. Well, what happens 99.9% or 110% of the time when you hit a rock? Nothing. But Moses, servant of Yahweh, walked up to the rock, and he struck the rock, and out flowed living waters. And the people drank, and the people lived. Well, that particular incident is recalled by Jesus in John chapter 7. And by the way, let me remind you, as I pointed out last week, in the celebration of Sukkot, they had the festival of the water drawing, which was really the ultimate. It was the, I won't say penultimate, because penultimate means next to the last, okay? But the water drawing was considered the climax of Sukkot. And as the children of Israel, and on the last day of the feast, the people would break up into three different groups. One group would go into the temple and there observe the offering of the sacrifices. Another group would go out to a place called Maza, M-A-Z-A, and there they would cut down willow branches. Those willow branches would then be taken back up to the temple where the great altar of burnt offering was, and they would lay those willow branches up against the altar, and those willow branches were cut sufficiently long so that they would come up and they would form a canopy over the altar. Now, all the while that this is going on, you have the sounding of the trumpets, you have the singing of the Hallel, of the priests, singing the Psalms from Psalms 113 following. And then you had that third group of people who were going with the priest, one of the chief priests, going down out of the gate on the southwest corner of the temple, going down to the pool of Siloam, filling a bowl that would hold approximately 2 quarts of water. Filling that bowl of water, they would come singing and praising and dancing back into the temple through what they called the water gate. And there, the priest would walk around to the north side, and at the northwest corner of that altar, there was a funnel. There were actually 2 funnels. One was for the wine offering, and there was an attending priest standing there with a bowl with wine in it. He would pour his offering of wine into that funnel, and that would come out at the base of the altar. Then the other high priest, holding the water in the golden vessel, would take his, he would hold that pitcher up, or that bowl up, pour his bowl of water out into the second funnel, and it would pour along and flow in with the wine, so that you had water and wine flowing together. And all the while, the people were singing, "We will with joy draw water from the well of salvation," which is a quote from Isaiah chapter 12 and verse 3. And as the climax to the day, now, for the 6 previous days, the children of Israel walked around the altar one time, and the trumpet blasted. On the 7th day, the last day, the children of Israel marched around the altar 7 times. Does that recall anything to you? I'm sure it does. When the children of Israel began to enter into the promised land, Jericho, a strongly fortified city, was the very first obstacle in their path for entering into and for conquering the promised land. And the Lord told the children of Israel, for 6 days, you march around the city of Jericho to the sound of a trumpet. On the 7th day, you march around the city 7 times with the sound of the trumpet for each circle. And at the sounding of the 7th trumpet, the people are to shout and praise the Lord. And when they did, the walls of Jericho fell outward. The children of Israel conquered their enemy. They took the land. They achieved salvation. Let me put it like that. Now, on this 7th day of Sukkot, the children of Israel had their lulav and their ethrog. The ethrog was a citrus fruit, very often a lemon. They called it the fruit of paradise. And they had their lulav, which was consisting of myrtle and willow. And I've completely and totally forgotten what the other one was. Oh, my goodness, that's terrible. As many times as I've said it, many times as I've read it. But anyway, had 3 species of plant. And each time, or all the while, they are circling the great altar that is now, you see, compassed with these willow branches, forming this canopy over the altar. The children of Israel, with their ethrog and their lulav, they are shaking these toward the altar, and they're singing, "Save, Lord, save us now." Now, I want you to notice a little bit of irony here. No, not a little bit, a whole lot. Back in Matthew chapter 21, as Jesus was entering the city for the last time, immediately before his crucifixion, what happened? Now, I got to tell you, this incident has caused a tremendous amount of consternation, a tremendous amount of discussion among the scholars. Why? Well, because the occasion, we know that when Jesus entered into the city this last time, it was the occasion for the Passover. It literally was not the occasion for Sukkot, which was 4 months later. And yet, the scholars say, well, John was confused here. John had his chronology all wrong. The people were confused. I mean, they make every excuse in the world trying to lay some kind of blame on either John as the author or on the children of Israel for being confused, or to find some kind of fault with the biblical record. Well, why could it not be? Just think about this. Why could it not be that the children of Israel knew precisely what they were doing? Number one, they knew Passover was at hand. Duh. I'm sorry. They knew their chronology a whole lot better than most commentators do. They knew it was Passover that was at hand. They knew it was not Sukkot that they were chronologically correctly celebrating. But I want to make a proposal. Instead of ascribing error and confusion to the people, instead of ascribing error to John, the author of the gospel, saying, well, he was older when he wrote the gospel, and he just simply forgot which feast it really was. It was literally Passover, and he kind of accidentally confused it with Sukkot, And so he had the people laying their palm branches in the way of Jesus as he rode into the city. And John was simply confused. We don't have to read into it anything other than a bad memory. After all, John's an old man by now. Like I said, it seemed like scholars will bend over backwards in order to find some way to find fault either with the Jews or with the biblical writers. So again, my suggestion is the people knew precisely what they were doing. Let's keep in mind there was a tremendous amount of confusion, but also a tremendous amount of excitement over Jesus entering the city. I mean, after all, this is very often called the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, right? He's riding on a donkey, which goes back to Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Behold your king riding on a foal, the colt. These people had an idea of what was going on. They were heralding Jesus as their Messiah. You think they didn't know about Zechariah chapter 9? Do you think that they were not aware of what they were proclaiming? Now, let me tell you something. The chief priests, the leaders of the Jews, they didn't like this even a little bit that the people were doing this. But I want to propose to you that the people who had just, who had just a few months prior been celebrating Sukkot, if I have my chronology right, and I'm actually terrible on chronology, but if in fact John chapter 6 through 8 is just recently in the past, as I believe it was, what had they been doing just 4 months previously? They had been circling the altar with their lulav and with their etrog, crying out, "Save, Lord, save us now." They had been cutting down the willows to form the panoply over the great altar to represent God's dwelling with the altar. And again, they had been singing, "Save, Lord, save us now." So what are they singing as Jesus begins to enter the city? What are they saying? Hosanna, Son of David. What does Hosanna mean? It means save us. So what I'm suggesting to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Jews knew exactly what they were doing. They were transposing the events, the songs, the sentiment, the prayer of Sukkot, which was just a couple of months past. And with the swiftly approaching Passover, which, by the way, was a feast of salvation. Okay? Because through the sacrifices of Passover, what happened? The Lord passed over their sins and did not destroy them. And just like Exodus 12 through 14 describes, Israel was saved on the night of the Passover. And I have to share this with you. Many ancient rabbis said, just as Israel was redeemed on the night of the Passover, so Israel will be redeemed by Messiah on Passover. You see, they understood the typology. The ancient Jews very often said, as it was in the days of Moses, it will be in the days of Messiah. As it was 40 days in the days of Moses, it shall be 40 years or 40 years in the days of Moses. It shall be 40 years in the days of Messiah. And see, that's a reflection of Micah chapter 7 and verse 15, in which the Lord, looking down the stream of time, said, according to the days of the coming out of the land of Egypt, so I will show wonders in the land. Many scholars, many commentators have looked at that passage, and there's a little bit of translational issue, but nonetheless, many well-known Hebraists say that the meaning of this text, the true meaning of the text is that God was saying, just as God performed miracles for 40 years in the wilderness in the first Exodus, God was promising that during the second Exodus, there would be a period of time of 40 years in which he would once again perform miracles. After 40 years, the miracles of the Exodus ceased, Joshua chapter 5, 12 and following. Just so, after the 40 years of the second Exodus, the miracles of the second Exodus would come to an end. And you see, the ancient rabbis had a grasp. They had this concept of all of these things. And so again, I suggest to you that when the people, even though the technical time was the time of the Passover, they understood the Passover was a time of salvation, but they also understood that in the typology of Sukkot, that Sukkot typified the coming of their final salvation. I have been reading an article today, whatever in the world I did with it. Been reading an article today entitled Sukkot, Eschatology, and Zechariah chapter 14. And this author by the name of Rubenstein, he cites some amazing scholars and quotations concerning Sukkot. Now remember, folks, this has to do with the temple and the Messianic temple. On the one hand, we are told by our dispensational friends, there's going to be a literal temple, a literal physical temple in the millennium. And yet, according to Revelation chapter 21, in the new creation, there is no temple. For God and his Son are the temple. And so the question is raised, and I have talked to some dispensationalists who have said, well, that's true. There will be a temple in the millennium, literal, physical, granite, marble, gold, silver, cedar. There will be a temple like that, physical edifice in the millennium, but there won't be in the new heaven and new earth. Well, let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. What's the need for a literal physical temple in the millennium if it's going to be taken away and removed for the far greater presence of God and his Son in the new heaven and new earth? Obviously, the no temple situation is the ultimate goal. The millennium is the interim measure to get to the new creation. So why in the world would God ever want to rebuild a temple that was not his stated desire in the first place? Why would God reinstate animal sacrifices, which from the very, very beginning and from like Psalms 45, in sacrifice and offering and burnt offering, you have had no pleasure, but a body thou hast prepared for me. Quoted, by the way, in Hebrews chapter 10, in the context in which Judaizers were trying to force the Jews who had accepted Jesus and had become Christians. They were trying to go back to the law, go to the temple, go to the land, worship in the city, the Judaizers were trying to coerce their fellow brethren back to the law. They were also trying to coerce Gentiles into keeping the law, to honoring the land, to putting their emphasis, to put their affection on the land. Listen, I wrote a little book a couple of years ago entitled Misplaced Minds, Dispensationalism and Colossians 3, 1-2. It absolutely amazed me as I began to look at that passage in Colossians chapter 3. Do not set your affection on things on the earth. Set your affection on things in the heavens. Now, look, the great majority of my life, I thought Paul was essentially saying, don't be earthly minded. Don't be carnally minded. Don't put your affection on physical things in this world, as Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, where he said, lay up for yourselves in treasure, lay up for yourself treasure in the heavens, where the moth and the rust does not corrupt, and the thieves do not break through and steal. I thought that's all that Paul was saying. But in the context of Colossians chapter 2 and chapter 3, where Paul is telling Gentiles, let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths. In other words, don't be judged. Don't let anyone force you and coerce you into going to the temple, the physical temple. Now, please catch the power of this. According to dispensationalism, are you ready for this? According to dispensationalism, Paul was saying, don't let anybody coerce you now under the gospel into going to Jerusalem, worshiping at a literal physical temple, and offering physical bloody sacrifices. Because those are types and shadows of the better things that are just about to come. Colossians 2:17. Therefore, do not set your affections on the land, not the earth, on the land of Israel, that the Judaizers are focused on. Because they're still claiming Jerusalem is still the city of God. The temple is the temple of God. Those sacrifices still are to be offered according to the law. Paul would have none of it. So consider, Paul says, do not let anybody judge you in respect of going up to the temple, the literal physical temple, the literal physical Jerusalem. And yet, what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the Messianic temple, we are told that in the millennium, Jesus, according to Zechariah chapter 6, 13 and 14, he shall be a king and a priest on his throne, and he shall build the temple. So we're told that Jesus, according to dispensationalism, Jesus will build the temple. And then we are told in Zechariah chapter 14 in the millennium that all of the survivors of all of the nations that came up to fight against Jerusalem shall go up every year to Jerusalem there to observe the feast of Sukkot. And it shall come to pass that whatsoever people do not go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, the Lord will cause it not to rain on them. He will bring on them all of the plagues of Egypt. Wait a minute. So here we have dispensationalism that says in the millennium, there's going to be a temple literally built by Jesus. And if anyone refuses to go up to the literal city of Jerusalem. In other words, if anyone refuses to put their affections on the land, they will be cursed. They will receive no rain, and God will bring on them the curses of Egypt. Okay, so in the millennium, if you do not allow yourself to be judged according to new moons, to feast days, to Sabbaths, the land and the temple and the sacrifices, if you refuse to be judged according to whether or not you do those things, and if you refuse to go to Jerusalem, if you refuse to go to the temple, if you refuse to offer the sacrifices, you are cursed. So let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. What happens to the gospel of Christ in the millennium? You know, the gospel of Christ that says no animal sacrifices, no physical temple, no literal city, no Levitical priesthood, no literal physical altar. And if you seek to be justified by the law, that's the law of Moses that mandated land, city, temple, priesthood, sacrifices, and oh, by the way, physical circumcision. If you seek to be justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. So we have, ladies and gentlemen, if you happen to be a dispensationalist and you're watching this program either tonight or in the near future, let me ask you a question. What happens to the gospel of Christ in the millennium? Some years ago, I wrote to Thomas Ice, who is one of the leading dispensationalists in the world today, of course, and I've had 4 debates with Thomas Ice. He refuses to debate me again, and there's little question why. It's not a brag, it's just simply a fact. So I was writing a little book entitled The New Covenant, Future or Fulfilled. It's available on my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. So as I was pondering the things that I've just shared with you about this millennial temple, which is supposedly a literal physical temple built by Jesus himself, in which bloody animal sacrifices will be offered, even though, by the way, he can't offer them because he's of the Melchizedekan priesthood, not of the Zadokite priesthood. And according to the book of Ezekiel, only the Zadokite priesthood is allowed to offer sacrifices in the millennial temple. That's a problem. So anyway, we have Jesus who constructs this temple, and it is mandated that both Jew and Gentile alike must go to Jerusalem, the land, the city, the temple, the priesthood, the sacrifices, and circumcision. Yes, circumcision. Also wrote a book entitled Circumcision in the New Creation. You need to order, if you go to my website and you order the book Circumcision in the New Heavens, New Earth, or in the New Creation, as well as the New Covenant, Future or Fulfilled, send me a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. I can't do it on just either one of them, but if you order them together, I'll refund your shipping. Now, so back to the conundrum here. We have Jesus who builds this temple and commands and mandates both Jew and Gentile, goes up there, offers bloody animal sacrifices, and if they don't do it, if they don't observe the Feast of Sukkot, and by the way, it's not just the Feast of Sukkot, it's Rosh Hashanah. And it's, Sukkot. Oh, and it's all of the Sabbaths, according to Isaiah 66. So if you don't go to Jerusalem, to the land, the city, the temple, the priesthood, the sacrifices, and circumcision, and if you don't observe the Sabbaths, the new moons, the feast days, and Sukkot, you are accursed. But wait a minute. Remember now, Paul said, let no man judge you in spite or in regard to new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths. So with this conundrum in my mind, I sent Thomas Ice an email. And I said, Thomas, I need to know, will there ever be a time or circumstance in which the gospel of Jesus Christ is no longer operative and binding? I didn't know if he'd answer the question. I really didn't. Lo and behold, he wrote me back. He answered my email, and he cited Matthew chapter 24, verse 35. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word will never pass away. And he took note of the Greek. Pardon me. The force of the Greek there is doubly powerful to emphasize the fact under no circumstances whatsoever will the gospel of Christ ever pass away. It will never be inoperative. Ladies and gentlemen, do you catch the power of this? On the one hand, my dispensational friends, and believe me, I use that sincerely. My dispensational friends are looking for the messianic temple in this proposed millennium. This proposed messianic temple in the land of Israel, a literal city that you must go to, a literal physical temple that you must go to, a literal physical Zadokite priesthood that you must submit to, bloody animal sacrifices that must be offered. By the way, you know, Merrill Unger and some other noted dispensationalists, Dwight Pentecost, for instance, tried to make the argument, well, you know, all of these sacrifices that will be made during the millennium, they won't be for the atonement. They will actually be memorials. Well, in the first place, there's not a single text in all of the Bible that says or indicates such a thing. Not one. Thomas Ice rejected Unger and Pentecost view, admitting there is no passage that says that the millennial bloody animal sacrifices will in any way commemorate or be memorials of the sacrifice of Jesus. Thomas Ice knows that in Isaiah 43, 44, and 45, the prophet was emphatically, specifically, and explicitly told that the sacrifices would be made, quote, to make atonement for the people. That's the exact precise terminology that is used in Exodus, used in Leviticus, used in Numbers, in which we are told about the bloody animal sacrifices that were made, quote, to make atonement for the people, unquote. So again, Thomas Ice understands that. So when I asked Thomas Ice, will there ever be a time in which the gospel of Christ will ever be inoperative, never be in force, never applicable? And he wrote back and said, absolutely not. And again, cited Matthew 24 and verse 35. Well, in the little book that I just mentioned a moment ago, entitled The New Covenant, Fulfilled or Future. Oh, and by the way, I hope you understand, in the dispensational paradigm, they claim that the new covenant that was promised in Jeremiah 31, 29 to 31, they claim that has never been established. That the gospel is not the new covenant promised in Jeremiah. Even though the new covenant promised by Jeremiah would give the forgiveness of sin, and even though the gospel offers the forgiveness of sin, and even though Jesus, when he was instituting the Lord's Supper, he took the cup and said, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you for the remission of sin." Even though Jesus is very clearly echoing Jeremiah 31, dispensationalists say, no. Jesus was not instituting the new covenant of Jeremiah. We're still waiting for that. And it's the Jeremiah covenant, which we are told will command and demand pilgrimages to the land, the city, the temple, bloody animal sacrifices, the Zadokite priesthood, and circumcision. So Thomas Ice says there will never be a time when the gospel of Christ is ineffective, is inoperative, and is not applicable. Okay. And yet the same man, Thomas Ice, and those who follow him, go to Zechariah chapter 14 and tell us the time is coming. Oh, it's in the millennium, when if you don't go to the land, you're cursed. If you don't go up to the temple, you're cursed. If you don't offer bloody animal sacrifices through the Zadokite priesthood, you're accursed. So here's the conundrum, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about the Messianic temple, okay, which has been the subject of our discussion with William Bell and myself, and with Daniel as well, Daniel Rogers and myself on this program. Are you looking for a future millennium in which you're going to take Zechariah 14 in a literal physical sense that demands pilgrimages to the physical land, that demands worshiping in the literal physical temple? Does it matter? Now remember, it cannot be said, this cannot be said, as dispensationalists have tried down through the years. They have tried to say, well, the gospel is really for Gentiles. The new covenant is for Israel. Well, I'm sorry, that won't work, because Zechariah chapter 14 is talking about all the nations of the earth that came up against Jerusalem, and thus they're not Jews. They're not Israelites. And it's the survivors of all of these pagan nations who are now being converted to the Lord, who must come to Jerusalem. And thus the dispensational argument that says, well, yeah, Preston, your argument here falls apart when you're trying to say, well, is it the gospel or is it the new covenant? Because it's both, because the gospel is for Gentiles and the new covenant is for Israel. No, once again, that will not work, for the simple matter, Zechariah 14 is talking about both Jews and Gentiles, and makes it abundantly clear that it's the Gentiles of the nations who came against Jerusalem, the pagans, but who survived the day of the Lord, pardon me, just like Isaiah 66, 18 and following describes, the nations of the world who survived the day of the Lord are then sent into all of the world to preach the truth of Yahweh to the nations, to the kingdoms who had never, listen to me very carefully, who had never known the name of the Lord and who had never worshiped him. That's powerful stuff. Okay. So there's no argument. Truth of Israel. One law. It's the gospel of Christ, which is the new covenant, which forbids, ladies and gentlemen, forbids putting any emphasis on physical land. Oh my, how desperately our dispensational friends need to understand this mandate. Do not set your affections on the land. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the land that we sometimes call the promised land, and it was for Israel at one time, is no longer the, quote, holy land. It does not belong to Israel anymore. Never did in reality. You know, Exodus chapter 23 or 34:23, the Lord said concerning the land is mine. You are but strangers and pilgrims on it. The land is mine. It's not yours. And the only reason and the only way that Israel ever had a, quote, right to the land was if and when they were obedient to the law of Moses. But the Lord himself has removed the law of Moses. Therefore, any condition upon which Israel might lay claim to the land is now gone. And so we have to understand these things, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, in both of these books that I mentioned, The New Covenant, Future Fulfilled, and Misplaced Minds, in both of these books, I discuss these things, some in more detail in one than in the other. So do yourself a favor and please get a copy of both books, and you will find that any emphasis on a future rebuilt, literal, physical temple by Jesus, in which animal sacrifices must be offered by the Zadokite priesthood in a literal city, Jerusalem, in the literal land of Canaan, that doctrine is false. What does that say to us? What does that say to us about the nature of the Messianic temple? It says worlds to us, and it tells us the Messianic temple has nothing to do with meats or drinks or the observance of days or the offering of animal sacrifices. It has nothing to do with pilgrimages to a land or to a city or to a temple. It has everything to do with God dwelling in us, just as Ezekiel closed out his marvelous book and this enigmatic description of the temple of God, saying, basically, here's the summary of everything, that in this temple, it shall be said, God is there. Now, is that good news or what? We don't have to have a physical temple to go to. He dwells in us. We dwell in him. And so, as Jesus stood in the temple, or just before he did in John 6, as he was in the temple in John 7, as he had just left the temple in John chapter 8, and he made the declarations that sounded for all the world like the celebrations that had just been made in the temple. And instead of pointing back up there to that marvelous, marvelous edifice on that mountain, what did he do? I am the light of the world. If you believe in me, out of your belly shall flow rivers of living water. The imagery that Jesus used, incorporated, the imagery that he drew on that was fresh in the minds and in the hearts of the audience that was in the temple and that was still around the temple a day later. Cannot be missed. It should not be missed, although tragically, many, many, many people do miss it. But the imagery is profound. It is beautiful. And I hope this lesson has helped. And you know what, Daniel, are you anywhere around? I believe I'm out of time. I did not start my stopwatch.
Yeah, Don, you're right at an hour. You did good.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this evening here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, Voice You Can Trust. Daniel, get better. Hope your little boy gets better. And ladies and gentlemen, good night and God bless.